All right, woodworkers, welcome back. So on to our next big project. We're done with making jigs. If you watched my most recent video on the thin strip jig, now we're gonna get into making our first cutting board. So some backstory, even though you know that I've been waiting to get into the cutting board game, I showed my boss, my dresser, and the annual Christmas party is coming up, and he asked me if I would make a cutting board to raffle away, thinking mistakenly that I was some kind of expert. So what he doesn't know is he's going to get my very first attempt at a cutting board ever. So hopefully it comes out well. I've decided on a pattern that I really like, and I'm going to try to replicate. I've done a lot of research, but this video will not be an instructional tutorial type video. It's going to be just watch me go. And that's because I've realized over my jig making videos that if I go into a video, a tutorial like video, without a plan, and I've never done it before, then the video doesn't come out very good because I'm kind of learning as I go instead of teaching what I already know. So this one is just going to be a watch me go, and hopefully it comes out correct. So we're going to use maple and walnut, the two very common woods for cutting boards, with, again, a pattern that I like. This is going to be an edge grain board, so not a face grain, not an end grain, an edge grain, and I'm going to try to go for about an inch and 3/4 thick by about 15.75 to 10.5. So 15.75 long by 10.5 wide and an inch and 3/4 deep. And that's just a ratio kind of 1.5 that I found is common. Most people make 18 by 12 inch cutting boards, but the pattern that I'm doing requires a certain set of strips of maple and walnut, and it came out to about 10.5 wide. So multiply that by 1.5 and you get 15.75 long. So I'm gonna just start going. So yeah, watch and learn. Okay, so here you're seeing me use the jointer to put a straight and parallel edge on either edge of the walnut board since they were still rough lumber, so that I could later rip them to 1 3/4 inch thickness for the overall thickness of the cutting board. Okay, so now I'm taking all of the lumber that's been milled up, and I'm going to cut it down to just a little bit longer than I need. Remember, 15.75 inches. So I'm going to cut each strip to 17 inches to give me some room to work with on the end for error. And I'm using my stop block here on the miter saw so I can get accurate, repeatable cuts on all of my stock. So now we're at the table saw. I'm going to take each piece of stock with that jointed edge against the fence, and I'm going to rip each piece into 1 3/4 inch strips. Remember, what you're ripping here for an edge grain board, the total width that you're ripping is going to be the overall end thickness of your board. So I was going for 1 3/4 inches, so I'll rip a little bit wider than that, so that as I plane it and sand it towards the end of the project, I end with that overall thickness of 1 3/4 inch. So like I said, all of my walnut was rough sawn lumber. When I started the project, all of the maple had been 4S4, so surfaced on all four sides. The walnut was not, so I started by milling down all of the appropriate faces of the walnut so that I could plane them next. Another note here is that you could pre-mill, pre-surface like 4S4 all of your lumber before even starting the project, but the boards I was working with were 8 to 10 inches wide. I don't have a joiner that wide, and I find that when you use smaller stock like this for joining purposes, you can work out a lot of the imperfections of the wood, the bows, the twists, the warps, whatever, without losing as much material when you use or join surface, whatever you want to say, thinner stock. So I just choose to do it after I've got everything cut down to rough final size. Okay, and now that we've got one surface jointed on all of our walnut boards, I come over to the planer to plane them down to final thickness of 3/4 of an inch, I believe is what I was going for here. You'll see that I started just sending one strip through at a time, and that's like super time consuming, so you'll see later on I start sending 2 at a time through, and I've even done up to 4 with other projects. So you can do it however you'd like. Alright, so what you're seeing me do here is take some thin milled up strips of walnut and I think pine that I had already had, and I'm just putting some corrugated pipe tape over them. You could use Tyrex tape, all kinds of other tapes, anything that's kind of glossy like this and won't stick to dried wood glue. But I'm making calls essentially here, right? For the final glue up, you use calls to keep the board aligned and flat so that the clamping pressure doesn't misalign your boards as you add clamping pressure, and you'll see me add them. So typically you just want 4, you can have as many as you want, but I'd say a minimum of 4. Alright, so here's the glue up, right? So you see me start with these 2 parallel clamps. I lay all the pieces out as they're going to be rotated up, and then I'm using Type-On 3 Ultimate Wood Glue. You could use Type-On 2, but Type-On 3 is better under hot water, and so it makes the boards dishwasher safe. If you're using Type-On 2, even though it is waterproof and food safe, I would say not to advertise your boards as dishwasher safe and only hand washing. I got this little silicone roller and like holder. I don't know what you want to call that. I'm blanking on it. But anyways, it works pretty well. You could use a glue bot. You could just dump the glue on and then spread it by hand, whatever you want to do. This works pretty well. I would say though it doesn't apply as much glue as I would like, and so to each their own. So many different ways to do a glue up, but you just want to make sure that you have great coverage a lot of coverage on each piece as you rotate it up and add that clamping pressure. You'll get that squeeze out so that there are no gaps in your final glue up once it's all dried. Alright, so once you've got all of your boards set against each other, you want to bring your clamps so that they're applying just the smallest amount of clamping pressure, and I used an off-cut scrap piece of wood that I knew was flat on one side to go ahead and align the boards as much as I could. And then I'm adding these spacers here under the clamp so that I can utilize the cauls, which I'm doing right here. So the cauls, you just clamp one to the bottom, one to the top, and use some hand clamps to keep the boards flat before you start applying that pressure. Now you're seeing me apply the pressure with the parallel clamps. I add a third in the middle, and this is where you can really tighten them up once you've got the cauls on there so that you're not gonna risk misaligning the boards. And I use some extra hand clamps that I have laying around to just add even more clamping pressure where I can. Okay, after letting the glue dry and cure for 24 hours, I came back to take all of the clamps out so I could begin surfacing to get the board to its final flatness. So after I had the board laid out, I came back with a chisel to get all of this dried glue squeeze out off. Another method is after about 30 minutes of the glue hardening, it's kind of soft and pliable, and you can scrape it off with a card around the clamps so that this process on the back end is a lot easier. Alright, so after you've got your cutting board out and all the glue scraped off, you're gonna find the side that's flattest. So lay it on a flat side, on a flat surface, and kind of rock the corners back and forth to see which side is the flattest. If you used cauls and parallel clamps, you're likely going to have the side that was resting on the top of the parallel clamps, so the bottom side essentially the flattest, and that's the side you can run through the planer to get parallel flatness on either side. Once you've got one surface flattened, you can flip it over and plane the parallel side. Another method is to use a planer sled if you just don't have either side flat enough, and you can use offcuts to kind of shim into the board to make it flat and get one side parallel before running the opposite side through. Once you've got your board planed and parallel on both sides, you're going to take it to your table saw to square up all four sides. So you'll see me start with just the standard table saw fence to get the long edges, and then I'll use my crosscut sled with my parallel sides to get the opposite sides, the perpendicular sides. Okay, and now we get to use our juice groove jig and our trim router with the core box round nose bit to start our juice groove. So you'll see me stop here periodically throughout each pass to vacuum up all of the wood shavings that are coming out, and that's just because I find if you don't, some of the wood shavings can get in between the router base and the edges of your juice groove jig, and it'll kind of push your router base off of the rail guides, and it can, you know, prevent you from getting that nice square juice groove. So you're going to do it in multiple passes, as deep as you'd like to go. If you're getting burn marks in your juice groove, once you make your final pass to the final depth that you'd like, just do a real shallow final pass to get all of those burn marks out. After cutting the juice groove into the cutting board, I came to the table saw to cut a 45-degree chamfer in all four sides to give it a unique look, but also to act as handholds when using the board. So now it's time for everybody's favorite part of a woodworking video, the sanding. And I think the sanding is one of the most critical parts of a cutting board, of finishing a cutting board. So you'll see me use 4 grits here. I step up from 80 grit up to 120, 220, and finish with 400. I use the pencil to mark prior to my 80 and 120 grit sanding, just to ensure that I was cleaning up anything the planer couldn't get, to ensure an even smoothness across the entire surface, all surfaces really. It also helps when you're using this 80 grit sandpaper to get any saw marks or burn marks out from the saw blade and any of the sides that you have on your board. A really important note here, especially when you're using a 45-degree chamfer like I was, and you have to hand sand because you don't want to use an orbital sander because it may round out your edges more than you'd like, is you want to make sure that you're going in the direction of the grain. So you'll see on the shorter sides here, I'm going up and down versus kind of horizontally with the sanding, and that's because that's the direction that the grain runs into. So it's a lot more work, but it just ensures that you're not getting any burnout on your sanding. Another note here is that you'll see me start to use gloves later on when I'm hand sanding with the block sander, because using my hands to wrap around that coarse 80 grit sandpaper was just a horrible idea. It really started to irritate my hands, so I got some gloves after this, and that made a big difference. Okay, the most critical step, I think, when finished sanding your cutting board. In between your second to last and last grits, so for me between 220 and 400, you're going to take a spray bottle with some water and water pop your board. So just spray it down, you definitely don't want to dunk it, and then take an excess cloth and wipe off any of the pooled water. Let that dry for about 30 minutes and then come back and do your final sand. The reason we're doing this is so that after you water pop and you let it dry, you'll come back and feel your board and notice that it's kind of fuzzy. If you didn't do this step, after the first time that you wash your cutting board, you'll see that all of those wood grains and fibers have raised and made your board fuzzy. So when you water pop it like this and then knock it down with the 400 grit, after that next wash, the first wash of your cutting board, you'll feel that it's still smooth and you don't get any of those raised fibers. Some people like to water pop between every grit. I'm not sure if that's necessary. I'll let you know in the future, but you can do it however you'd like. That's just my recommendation. Okay, so I added this in just to show you that I made my own food safe cutting board finish. It's a real simple mixture. It's a 4:1 ratio of food safe mineral oil and beeswax pellets. So I use 64 ounces of mineral oil mixed with 16 ounces of beeswax pellets. I can make a video going into more depth in this, and I'll also link the original content creator that showed me how to make this mixture in the description below. It was actually kind of a funny process. You'll see me switch crock pots here because I needed a bigger one, and when I went to pour it into the final container, you saw me make a huge mess. It's not a big deal. I did it in my kitchen. It's all food safe. It just leaves kind of a waxy residue on your floor that can be a little bit of a mess to clean up. Okay, so on to the final sanding of 400 grit. I didn't have 400 grit random orbital sander pads, so I just used the hand sander here. I also want to make a note that I guess I water popped in between 120 and 220 and not 220 and 400. However, on a later cutting board, I did it between 220 and 400 and it came out just fine. So either one is fine. Like I said, you can even water pop between each grit. I think it just saves a lot of time if you do it before the final. Okay, and now you'll see me come back here with a microfiber cloth just to wipe off any of the excess sawdust from sanding, and I also recommend, if you have it available, using a compressor and a blower attachment at like 90 psi to just blow out any excess sawdust that found its way into the grain and the pores of the cutting board. You'll find it makes a huge difference and you get a lot more out. So here at the end, it's finally time to apply your finish. There are so many different ways to apply a finish to a cutting board. Some people will dunk the board in a mineral oil and let it drip dry. I found that using my mixture of beeswax and mineral oil, all you need to do is buff on a generous amount to the entire board, let it sit for 24 hours so the mineral oil can soak into the fibers of the wood, and then buff it out after that 24 hours to just seal in and get off any of the excess wax residue left over. This seals your cutting board and keeps it nice and safe so that you only have to reapply every couple of months depending on how heavily you're using the board. All right, woodworkers, there you have it. From start to finish, our very first cutting board. Pretty wild, not gonna lie. The easiest project I have done so far in the wood shop. So you can definitely do it too. Um, it's an awesome feeling. It's a great feeling. I'm super happy with it, with how it turned out. Um, Really didn't give me much of an issue at all, and I don't know if that's because of all the things that I've learned in the time leading up to building my first cutting board here. Lots of techniques that I've used in other builds and learned from previously already were used to put this cutting board together, right? From the jointing, milling down, planing, utilizing the router, the glue up, all of those things um, were utilized in this project. So I think because I had already made the mistakes and learned from them, it was easy to move forward with doing this project. So, anyways, enough rambling on. This was a really fun build to make. It really wasn't difficult. I would say it's a beginner level project, and anyone can do it. I'm, like I said, extremely happy with how this turned out, and a little sad that um, my very first board will be given away, but I'm also glad that it's being given away because it's just a good feeling to give back, right? To give back to my profession, to my workplace, however you want to call it, right? To the people that make up my organization. I'm happy to be able to give them something that I spent time and energy on and am proud of. So again, here it is in all its glory. I couldn't be happier with it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Um, I don't have much more to say. I'm really, really proud of this project and really happy with it. And I hope you enjoyed the video. For more, like, subscribe, and comment. This has been 5 o'clock Woodshop.